been working on anti-extremism for a long time. We've got I'll just go how they're arranged on the screen in front of me. Lucianhudson, a very distinguished many things, including a very distinguished career at the BBC before joining the government, where he was the BBC and ITV, if I'm not mistaken, before becoming the UK government's first webmaster general, the director of e-communications for the UK government. Lucian has been the director of communications at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and has introduced tweeting and blogging to the Foreign Office as well many years ago. We've got also Paul Tweed, the international media lawyer, who's represented royalty, celebrities, politicians, and has been battling social media giants out of the non-American headquarters in Dublin. He's currently in Belfast. He practices out of Belfast, London, and Dublin, and is probably one of the world's leading lawyers on social media. Also got Constantinschreiber, one of Germany's most prominent broadcast journalists, currently with one of the main broadcasters there. He's written a number of best-selling books on extremism, on incitement. He's lived many years in the Middle East. His last book was called Inside Islam, where he looked at preaching inside mosques in Germany. That was a bestseller for, I think, almost a year. Yes. And is currently, I think, doing a phase 2 of this this project. I hope I haven't broken any secrets.
That's fine.
So let me start by going to Senator Goulet. Senator Goulet, you've written an article in Le Figaro last week after Facebook appointed an oversight board to basically adjudicate posts and basically an oversighting. You were very critical, or rather critical, of the way that the board's makeup was. Could you perhaps, just say something about your concerns? Why did you, the concerns that you've raised in the article, and what you think should be?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss about this subject with you. We always have in our country the kind of balance between democracy and freedom of speech, which is also always the way. But trying to stop internet is like trying to stop the wind. There is something which spread, and then you cannot get anything. And if there is a fake news, and if there is any kind of hate speech, better than I do, and Paul Tweed knows that, you all know that it's very, very difficult to withdraw the content. So after 2015, all the GAFAM took a lot of measure to be able to face this kind of hate speech and terrorism, so in the company they try to work how to withdraw those content and everything, and the things are going much better, but still. And then we just have this COVID-19 situation, which bring again the subject, because Facebook and Twitter and the social media becomes more and more occurrent, and we need them more and more, because we need this, we have this social distanciation, and so we need them more. So what we face, it's a very, very difficult, it's very difficult to take measures. So we try to implement some regulation especially in France 2 weeks ago. And by the way, we gave kind of delegation of internet police to Facebook. We wrote in the law, I don't vote it, but still, the law is like that. It belongs to Facebook to be responsible for the content. And at the same time, you have this new board of Facebook, and a lady who has a strong attach with the Muslim Brotherhood was nominated and appointed in this board, which creates some kind of traffic jump. You know, at the same time, you have this problem of a tremendous amount of people using the social network because of the COVID. And at the same time, you realize that, of course, the law is absolutely not efficient, and we cannot trust the social network to make the police. So that was more or less the situation. And as I wrote this article, you know that you have 2.7 user of Facebook and 1 billion user of Instagram, 2.7 billion user of Facebook, which is absolutely terrible. And during the COVID, Facebook has to send to the user 40 million messages, like a warning, like you receive a fake news. So, but you know, when the fake news is received, especially in this kind of time, which is full of complotism and a very difficult time for the society, when there is a fake news, there is a fake news. And whatever you get to court or whatever you do something, you cannot fix it. It's very, very difficult to fix it when there is some fake news or hate speech. So the situation is like that. And what is interesting is to try to build some kind of common understanding first, how it works, to try to prevent. But for me, it's a little bit difficult to understand that unless there is a very, very strong goodwill from the platforms themselves. Because, you know, the lawmaker is not very useful, you know. I think that it's not very efficient. I don't know if it's what you are expecting. I don't know if I was clear enough, but let's try with that.
No, I mean, that's very clear. You've mentioned, obviously, the member of the Muslim Brotherhood who's joined the Facebook oversight. Yes. That presumably is Tawakkul Karman, who's being photographed with, you know, Yusuf Qaradawi, who's banned from entering the UK and France.
Yeah, but not only. I had somebody who make a full study about her.
Right.
Because I didn't want to have complained about my position. And she also speak about genocide in Palestine. She's also very much supporting Morsi, that she compared Morsi to Mandela, you know. So if they need a Muslim woman for the board, which is very understandable, first a woman and then somebody knowledgeable about Islamic studies or religion or whatever, they can find anybody else but this one.
Absolutely agree. I mean, she's a very divisive figure. That's the whole point about you know, having an oversight board. You know, you can have your political opinion. That's you know, we're not talking about freedom of speech. We're talking about being neutral, and she's clearly not.
Yeah, because you also have all this theory about the neutrality of the net, which is just impossible. So at the same time, you cannot save the people of having fake news and hate speech. You cannot guarantee the neutrality, and at the same time, those people are not paying taxes, which is a lot for the same. So I think that it's we need to find a global understanding or working on it. UNESCO did it. United Nations try. European Union try also. But we don't have the solution right now. And maybe after the discussion, we will find some answers. I'm very, very ready to work with you on this subject because it's a major subject for me.
Absolutely, thanks. If I may go to Germany, to constantinschreiber, you've been looking at incitement outside the mosque, inside the mosques.
Inside the mosque, right.
Inside the mosque. But now with COVID, I mean, Germany has not been really under lockdown to the degree that we've been in the UK and France, perhaps. But is incitement via social media like Facebook, has it been a problem in Germany, or is it more of a secondary challenge?
Well, first of all, may I explain what I did for my book that you mentioned in Islam?
Of course.
Because it's very closely connected. It was published in 2017, and for almost a year, I went to different mosques in Germany every Friday in different cities to record Friday prayers. So I visited over the course of a year almost 50 mosques, 48, and I had these Friday sermons translated from Arabic, Turkish, Hindi, Bosnian to German. And all I did was basically publish these translations of Friday prayers in this book. It was not something that I wrote. It was just 90% a translation of these Friday sermons. And almost all of them were horrible. And I also went to mosques that were frequently visited by German politicians to show how they do interfaith, cultural understanding projects and that kind of thing. So they had pictures of those politicians inside these mosques together with the imams and very nice pictures. But when you went there on Friday sermons, they told terrible things like you are not allowed to have friends in this country, who said that women are allowed to work. If your child who is a girl grows up in this country, it shall not learn the language, and if it does, you shall beat the child. Horrible things. And like
Muslim Brotherhood, typical Muslim Brotherhood teachings, basically.
Yeah, okay, but because I didn't specifically went to mosques that were known for being extremist,
right.
But like general mosques that you can see publicly, they were not hidden, they were not sinister in any way. So I was very surprised to find that kind of speech inside these normal mosques. And what followed was, it became really bestseller. It was #1 best-selling book in Germany for 10 weeks. We sold 200,000 copies, which is a lot. I never imagined that normal people would be interested in reading Muslim sermons. But it caused a major upheaval because of very tight network of very conservative, extremist journalists, politicians who joined in accusing me of being racist, of trying to divide people, and they even sparked via Facebook, Twitter, Instagram fake news about my background, my work. There were claims that there were translation errors in the book that were never proven, but they just spread it via Facebook and so on. So people believed it in the end, yeah? I was invited to a talk show, and the talk show host, he said like, it's a very controversial book because of the translation errors inside the book. I said, no, there's no translation error to that point. And I even sued some of the journalists who mentioned that in articles, and they had to remove it. But still, it's something, if you ask about the book, because people still remember it, they would say, well, it's the book with the translation errors, right? So this is really the problem. And like what I didn't see before was this dangerous network of people on different levels of public society. And I over the course of time, I understood how closely connected they are. There are journalists here, there are some politicians there, and they play with each other. Yeah, there's a journalist, there's a politician, he wants to accuse someone who is a liberal Muslim or speaks out against problems. And of course, he knows then the journalist who would publish that kind of thing, that journalist would not publish an interview with a liberal Muslim. No, he would just publish the interview with the very conservative representative of Muslim community in Germany. And there are, like you also said about Tawakkul Karman, there are these women out there. Yeah, it's very hard to accuse a woman who seems to be very liberal and very open-minded, but indeed stands for a very, very conservative approach towards religion and Islam. That makes it very, very difficult. So in my case, and what I see, social media, it's part of the problem, but it's not the only problem, because you have people who know how to play with these things.
No, thanks. And whilst you were talking, we were very luckily, very happy to be joined by the Honourable Ian Paisley MP, who is in Northern Ireland. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Mr. Paisley has been at the forefront again of speaking against extremism. The last time we've met face to face was an event you've sponsored in Parliament for the for the Daniel and Amelia Lindsay Foundation victims of terrorism, the Sri Lanka attacks. That was just before the lockdown, and it is something that you've been talking about for long, particularly the banning of the Muslim Brotherhood. What has happened since you've spoken is that Facebook has, in fact, appointed a member of the Muslim Brotherhood to their oversight board. I just wonder what your thoughts on this are.
Well, thank you for arranging this very important webinar, and I appreciate the contribution so far by many like-minded colleagues from around the world on this. Look, there's two key issues. We've been campaigning now for a long time to try and have the government prescribe Muslim Brotherhood in the United Kingdom, and that has met with universal support across the House from various political parties and from various members of Parliament. And indeed, in direct discussions with the Home Secretary, there appears to be a willingness to try and start that process. But there is also a major block to it. I'd love to know what that major blockage is, because every time we make what is, I believe, a compelling case on prescription, the government says, yes, but we're still working on it. So we have to keep pressing to that agenda. When I meet with people from the Middle East, whether they're Egypt or from other countries, they can't believe the fact that the United Kingdom hasn't prescribed this organization, because they've led the way in saying this homegrown organization needs to be stopped because of the damage it's doing to genuine Muslims and to genuine outreach between our various faiths and tribes across the world. And so that really does need to be addressed and addressed urgently. The decision by Facebook, I believe, is so counterintuitive, it was unbelievable. That here we have an organization that's set up to have this round table, to have this transparency process put in place, and they then appoint someone who frankly is not and cannot be regarded as fit to be in the position that they've been appointed to. I've already written to Facebook. I've also asked the DCMS committee, the chairman of the DCMS committee in Westminster, to commence an investigation into this appointment. He has agreed in principle that that will take place. He has already flagged up that probably as early as July, there will be an announcement of an investigation into the conduct of Facebook and other platforms in this regard. And so they will be up in front of the committee soon. And if that happens, I certainly believe that this issue will be raised with them. But Facebook doesn't need to wait in Parliament. Facebook doesn't need to wait on you and me or on anyone else. Facebook could take immediate action. We were very pleased to see how Google acted immediately whenever there was an app being supported by the Muslim Brotherhood, and which was encouraging violence against non-Muslims and against Muslims who supported the British Army. Immediately that was brought to the attention of Google. They brought it down. They didn't need a seminar. They didn't need a parliamentary investigation. They acted immediately. And I think it's the same with Facebook. Facebook could do the right thing and act immediately. They're aware of this. They don't need any further coverage. They just need to do the right thing. And I think that we need to continue this vigilance and awareness raising around the world, because COVID-19 cannot be allowed to be an escape blanket under which these things can hide and disperse and get away. We need to highlight these issues, speak out about them, and make sure that we are as one, whether we are from Christian, Muslim, or Jewish background, or whether we're from no faith background at all. We need to speak out as one and say, look, we're for free speech, but we're not for the abuse of that free speech to destroy identity and undermine identity. Absolutely.
No, thanks very much. Before I go to Mr. Hudson, who would sort of wrap up the political, the legal stuff, I'll go to Paul Tweed, who has been dealing with the legalities and the challenges of social media. A year ago, the New York Times had a major piece about Mr. Tweed's argument that Facebook is no longer an impartial platform, but rather should be treated like any other publication. So I'll give the floor to Paul. Perhaps you could take over.
Thanks, Gannon. Right up until this morning, Facebook are still maintaining that they are just a platform. They're not a publisher. They have no responsibilities. They've actually stated in one of the things we get in our responses from them quite often, saying that Facebook has no obligation to monitor its platform for unlawful content, nor can it be legally obliged to do so. And yet here we have a situation where they've appointed their oversight board. So in addition to being their own judge, they've now got their own jury. And this is probably tantamount to a defendant in a criminal case being able to choose his court, his judge, and his jury in order to decide who's going to give them the best hearing. One of the problems I've had over the years with Facebook is they are not regulated by anyone. The traditional broadcast and print media here in the UK and in Ireland are subject to defamation laws. They're subject to IPSO as a regulator per se. And in Ireland, we've got the Press Council and the Press Ombudsman. Facebook and Twitter are not subject to any of these bodies. And yet they are taking all the advertising from mainstream media. They're lifting high-class investigation reports from very, very courageous journalists, but they're lifting them. They're not paying for it. The broadcaster or the newspaper has to do that. And they're sitting there basically saying, well, this has nothing to do with us. We just provide a platform for free speech. Then suddenly, in the last couple of years, this trend has changed around where they are starting to adjudicate, to arbitrate, albeit under pressure and under protest. But of course, the minute they start doing that, they cease to be a platform, which is their fundamental defense from litigation that they've tried to argue from the outset. And what I'm really concerned about at the moment, in very, very recent times, Facebook and Twitter have left themselves open to a situation where they can be accused of giving in to who shouts the loudest or whoever can exert the most influence or pressure in order to encourage suspension or closure of an account. Because we're now got a scenario where Facebook and Twitter are now selectively deciding which accounts they're going to suspend and choose. And that's all very well. In fact, that's very much a good thing if it's a case of a victim of harassment or abuse or whatever like that there. But this is suddenly now developing into a more sinister and worrying trend where they are now, whether it's happening or not, are exposing themselves to the criticism that they may be getting politically involved and that they are cherry picking whose account they should suspend and whose account should be terminated without giving any explanation other than saying that there's been a breach of their community rules or their regulations. Now, no court would tolerate that. No court of public opinion would tolerate that. But that's effectively what's happening at the moment. that, you know, we're clients, accounts, and we act for clients on all sides of the political divide, all sides of the religious divide. We act for clients from the United States, Russia, Middle East, North Africa, Europe, or whatever. I mean, I'm an officer of the court. We do not, you know, we don't judge. We just decide whether somebody has got a fair and legitimate case that can or should be brought before the courts. But here I am having to go up against a very, very wealthy organization like Facebook, Twitter, and indeed Google and YouTube, who basically have got the financial power to sustain any sort of attack. And then with the lockdown that the courts are in at the moment, they're in no hurry. They're in no hurry to respond. And yet they still take these decisions. And with, like, I don't know, I can't make any comment on the members of the Oversight Board. It'd be very unfair for me to do that. But who has picked them? Who put these 20 people in place? Facebook. They've selected them, and that is not fair to even the members of the board, because already there's a public perception, and already we've seen the outcry over one particular appointee. So where is that going to lead us? I mean, until we get together internationally, this is not something that Britain can do, or France can do, or the EU can do on their own. We need to get a global response and get a global regulator put in place, because it's in the interest of every single country on the planet. Just as much, albeit this is not nearly as serious an issue, but in the same way that we need to get a global response to the coronavirus pandemic, we need to get a global response to an issue, a social issue that crosses borders in a way that we have never seen in history. And Facebook, Twitter, they profit from being able to provide their facility for a price, for a cost, and they earn from it. So it is totally appropriate that they should be regulated. And that's my my lecture for today. You know, at the end of the day, if there's a school of thought that would say that the social network giants have actually elevated themselves to a position that's far more powerful than government and the courts worldwide.
Well, thanks very much, Paul. Talking of governments, before I sort of open for further comments, I'll go to Lucianhudson. Mr. Hudson's been really a pioneer in using social media. He opened the first person to bring tweeting to the UK government as the first webmaster general for the UK government. Lucian, when you started with social media, was that something that, you know, what the challenges that we've just heard from political, legal, and extremism, was it something that worried you? And 10 or 15 years later, how do you see the landscape? And you know, what are your thoughts about where we've reached from where we were when you really started this?
Thank you, Hanem. I mean, there's clearly been an evolution, and like with so many different technologies, you begin thinking that the technology could be benign, and then you reach a point where you think it has mixed blessings. And the people who are, you know, quite understandably have a liberal democratic view of these things would hope that, such is the nature of democracy, whether it's in person or online, the very context would find it a sort of natural equilibrium, that it will balance itself out. And certainly in my experience when I was the Director of E-Communications, the first one that the UK government had, and I set up the first government portal, we had pretty much a benign view of websites. And then several years later, when I introduced social media and tweets at the Foreign Office, again, a benign view of social media. I think rather like with Tim Berners-Lee, we've all become a little, you know, somewhat disappointed and concerned that things can take quite a negative turn. And the question is, even though it's very welcome that we have so many different ways, so many different channels in which people can express themselves, get information, share information, and give their comments, you do begin to worry about the provenance of that information, and particularly you begin to get concerned about information that is inaccurate or misleading and the right of redress. Now, from a conventional media background, I have spent a whole career living with the different forms of regulation. It's sometimes uncomfortable, particularly if you're a journalist, but nonetheless, ultimately, a well-regulated, not necessarily over-regulated, but a better regulated system gives confidence to everyone. It means that certainly in journalism and conventional journalism, you can work to certain standards. They are either imposed by society or imposed by the institution you work with, or a combination, or readers or users make up their own view. They choose you or they do not. The problem about the current environment is that unless the free-for-all is addressed, you find people who cannot express their views or find their views marginalized. And you also find, I think, that the confidence in institutions who are providing the platform begins to erode. And this is very serious. If you're Facebook or Twitter or anyone who has a platform, you've got to understand why newspapers ended up being seen as publishers. And with publication, there are obviously rights, but there are also responsibilities. And I think it's hugely important that we have a system that we all have confidence in, that balances rights with responsibilities, because without that, you begin to undermine the rights of individuals and the rights of minorities. So I suppose from a government perspective, you want, if you like, the context to reach its own conclusion. But I think there also has to be an appreciation that unless we operate here on a global level, we will find that people take advantage of the fact that you cannot find redress in one country. And I'm with Nathalie and Paul in looking at what could be a global framework here that everybody could follow and work within, that has enough freedom within that framework, but equally has in it, what I call the 5 R's. You've got respect, you've got rights, you've got responsibilities, you've got restraint, you've got regulation. And I think from time to time a review, because it's a fast moving, evolving situation.
Well, thanks very much. I'll go to Nathalie. You've raised your hand. You wanted to comment on something.
Yeah, I would like to comment for what has been said by Constantin, also Paul, and also Lucian, and of course our friend Jan. More I'm listening to you, more I want to underline the level of naivety that we have in our society. There is something like think unthinkable. 4 months ago, nobody would have think 1 minute that the full economy, the worldwide economy, would be locked down by a Chinese virus. And I think that the people are very, very naive. Our society are very naive, because at the same time, because it's not only about the Muslim extremism, it's also the white supremacy, it's also any kind of hate speech. And when I was listening to Constantin, I remember that we had some proposal in France to ask the khutbah to be in the language of the country. I mean, the preach has to be understandable. And there is absolutely, I make a report on the Senate, in the Senate for this kind of things, there is absolutely nothing in the Holy Quran or in the law or that to provide that, because you have a lot of Muslim people who are not speaking Arabic. So of course, for Turkish, by example. So it's very understandable, and it was happening in United Arab Emirates, for example. You have the translation of the khutbah, I mean, with another system. So I think that first of all, we need a global answer and we need to work on it. I think that we need to stop to be naive with the people who want to hurt our society, and we need a strong answer too. And then for the platform, and Paul is absolutely right, they have to be publisher, but they don't want, and they have absolutely no will. So I think that what may be useful is to build a real taxes law for them, because when you don't, you got Al Capone because of the taxes. If you want to hurt the people, you have to track the money. And with the money they are doing, they are stronger than states. And Paul is absolutely right. And it's very difficult now to have an answer, because there is nobody powerful enough to balance those platforms. They are apartheid because they don't pay taxes almost anywhere. They are apartheid because they support any kind of things and any kind of speech on there. And they are apartheid because they don't want to belong to any country, to be responsible for any common law. It's a little bit too much.
Yeah, if I could just chip in there as well, Nathalie, and I totally agree with you, but they've actually gone to an extreme level. Back in 2018, whenever the new European privacy laws introduced GDPR, Facebook took the proactive step of moving 1.5 billion users' data out of Ireland to the United States, where they saw a greater protection for it. So in other words, all the non-EU data was moved. They just did that. We have another situation where the Irish headquarters, which is supposed to be the European, Middle Eastern and Asian headquarters for Facebook, and if you can Google the company there now, you'll get that in the headline. And yet they recently have tried to argue that Egypt is not part of that, that Egypt, for some reason, is not Middle Eastern anymore. We're shifting it off to, I don't know, Africa or whatever. So what they're doing is to emphasize your point and the point that most of us, I think, are making. There has to be some form of global approach to this, because they are just moving between borders, either for tax reasons or to suit themselves, to avoid culpability or accountability under the law of whatever country they're in, whether it's European law or whatever. And I think that's something that's got to be the focus in the coming months, for governments to start addressing before it's too late.
What?
Lucian, please. Yeah. Sorry, you need to unmute.
Yeah, there's a legal, political, regulatory dimension this, which we cannot escape. And we have enough people on the panel and taking part in this who are speaking very well. And, it's especially valuable to have a senior politician also joining us. What I would say is always important is to get the public engagement side of this right. And I don't think enough of the public realize just how corrosive the bad side of the social media is. It's almost like people put up with it because they don't know there's another way. And I give a very concrete example here in the United Kingdom, and I think Ian would recognize it. We have a program here called University Challenge. So for the past 10 years, I've been working in the higher education sector. And for years now, we've had a quiz game called University Challenge. You couldn't imagine anything more innocuous. Students come together and they test their wits, and ultimately there's a winner. What we've seen recently is a number of women contestants, women students, who are more and more concerned about appearing on University Challenge. And one reason for that is that on social media, people can take issue with a contestant because of their gender, because of any sort of reason. And a number of women feel quite, as I understand it, feel quite vulnerable because of the social media. We can't have a Wild West going on in eternity on social media. We have to begin to expect a much higher standard, if only to make sure that it continues to be inclusive. So I would say, let's also try and make sure we get people on side, hearts and minds, to appreciate this is serious, it's corrosive, and something needs to be done about it. And if you're Facebook or anyone else, you can't just wait for pressure to be brought upon you. You've got to be proactive in your policy.
Yeah.
Yes, Ian, of course.
Yes, no, I think that's absolutely valuable points that have been made. I mean, look, I'm all for freedom of speech, but I think what has to go along beside freedom of speech, and maybe this is how we address Lucian's point, is we have to have knowledge of who is speaking. There has to be freedom around the person who is speaking, that their identity is known. You can't have freedom of speech on the one hand and hide under a cloak and say, I'm being secretive about who and what I am. And this is one of the great things that I have with Twitter, for example, is that they allow people to use that platform, which is a very valuable social network platform, but they're allowed to hide who and what they are, whether it's under the cloak of being a comedian or whether it's under the cloak of being something much more sinister. And I think what we have to get to is a reality that people are able to know, if you want to be free to say those things, we must know whom is saying those things. And that should be the grounds upon which we try and get the public support. Because I think anyone, any woman, any man, anyone who is subject to a person's viewpoint, if they know who's saying the viewpoint, that can take a lot of heat out of a situation. And it can also then inform people around why that person is free to say those things, but know that perhaps they may have an agenda, or it may just be a point of view that that person has. So I think the key thing is to find out who is speaking. And for me, that would be one of the priorities that we should really be pushing, and pushing the public consciousness that presently people can use freedom of speech and pretend to be a great libertarian, but actually they're hiding whom is speaking.
Absolutely agree. Constantine, is there anything else you'd like to add?
What I'm thinking as a journalist,
the way forward.
As a journalist, I look at things with a very specific perspective, probably. What worries me a lot is that when it comes to media and journalism, no one questions the power of these social media giants any longer. I mean, we're all producing videos and content for free for them to put it on their platforms. This is something I sometimes try to discuss with my bosses or with colleagues about this, because I find it bizarre, because we are making them even stronger, and we are providing the content for their platforms and drag people into this parallel universe. So I find that well, there is no solution to it, because people say, well, if we don't do it, we just leave this entire universe to fake news, bots and whatever. But I don't think that the solution is to shoot in videos from ARD or ZDF or BBC as many as you can to feed those people out there, or to provide them even with the power that they in the end can control what is being watched and what not. So but this is something, like I said, there's no solution to it so far. The solution would be probably, when it comes to countries, that media corporations within those countries, they form an alliance, that they work together and provide own platforms, but not a single TV channel or one single newspaper can do that. That would mean that all media corporations would have to work together. Then probably, or maybe they can have the power to provide something that is attractive enough to get people moved from Facebook to their own platforms. But as far as Germany is concerned, I don't see that. They're not even trying to establish an alternative model for people who are using social media. No, we are, like I said, we're producing videos for free for those platforms, and we're even proud of it. I don't see that there's any reason to be proud. So, but it's a lose-lose situation, really.
No, absolutely. Nathalie, sorry, I'll go back to you. You wanted to add something.
I'm sorry, when you give a mic to a politician, it's always what happened. There's always something to say. No, UNESCO spent a hell of money about education to media. And this education is not working at all. I'm not reading Arabic. No, I mean, I'm not reading Arabic. I'm not able to see the content. When we had this story with Paul and Jan, we had this Euro fatwa challenge, and we were quite successful because we had enough warning, strong enough to work together between the French Parliament, the lawyer, and the British Parliament. We worked together despite the Brexit. That has nothing to do with that. But I would like to suggest something. I think that we may work on some training program. Maybe together we may have an NGO or something. I mean, whatever is the ravioli, I mean, the box is not important. It's the content which is important. Is create a team with people speaking Arabic that have been trained or know what we are looking for and are able to send some warning when there is something quick enough. And I think that training and education is probably one of the key. Because if we cannot trust the media, the platform, which are not really publisher and blah, 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 if we cannot trust them, despite the effort that they have been doing for the last 5 years, because there is a huge progress, of course, maybe we can have a kind of NGO in charge of training people for media education, because that will be the key. You know, if you have some TV show or tweet speaking about some event with a picture supposed to be in summer, and one of a sudden you have snow in the corner, you know that the picture is not doesn't match the content of the thing. So all that is a question of education, and there is a full war between the bullet and the helmet. There is always something and somebody running faster, and we need to find a tool, because the will, the knowledge, the people who are used like you on this panel, and some lawmakers and a lawyer and everything. So I think that together we may put together some idea and try to build something, because this subject will stay forever and ever after. So we have to try something. We are not going to save the world, but maybe we can have good idea and spend less money than UNESCO for nothing.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a very useful suggestion. I'll obviously try to circulate everyone's contact details, so perhaps we could move it forward. Before we conclude, would anyone else like to add anything to this? Lucian, of course.
I'm just very interested and really appreciated Ian's comments and Nathalie's. Paul, you seem to have a very good sense of what will make these giants listen up or shift their position. It feels to me that we almost have to be in campaign mode. You know, what would it take to get enough pressure, influence used or leveraged to get these giants to think differently and act differently? I'd like to ask Paul a question. Where's their Achilles heel here? I mean, it sounds like anyone's Achilles heel is the income, but I'd be quite interested to know from you is where do we target, our sense of, anger, disappointment, frustration, so that we can find a constructive way of shifting the dial here?
Well, I've got to get them into court. I think that's the main objective. Get them into court and expose this fallacy of a platform. I mean, it's become embarrassing even to talk about it. I mean, I don't understand how it can be given any credibility as to what's happened. Second aspect would probably be, I mean, it has to be public opinion. I mean, after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Facebook invested millions and millions in advertising, in newspapers and magazines to both ingratiate themselves, I suspect, to the media by paying for advertising and by trying to court the public opinion that is very important to them, I think, for a number of reasons. One, obviously they're dependent on people coming to them for subscriptions, etc. The problem, and then the third aspect is taxation, and they obviously get treated very favourably in certain jurisdictions. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. Every company is entitled to go to the most favourable tax regime for them, and I don't have any objection to that. But there's got to be some fairness all around here. It's all one-way traffic at the moment. All the advertising is going to the social media networks. You know, they've got a situation where they're able to lift, as you were saying earlier, all the journalistic content. They've got everything going for them, and it's like a snowball going down a hill. It's gathering momentum. They're getting more powerful as they gather speed, and more power is being attached to them. And until there has to be an international or a global grasp in this, because while they are able to move around borders, while they're able to argue that it's not, you know, one particular company, it's another company, it's going to make it incredibly difficult for lawyers. It will not beat us, but it does slow matters up. And until we get something like that going, and until we can get public opinion in behind saying, recognizing on the one hand the good that Facebook, or certainly the good facility that Facebook and Twitter and YouTube provide, on the one hand, protect that and maintain that, but there's got to be this balance whereby they are not sitting there deciding as judge and jury who gets on their site, who goes off it, and then they're able to say that, you know, we're providing access to freedom of speech. It's freedom of their speech. It's whatever speech they're prepared to tolerate. And, you know, it's going to lead to all sorts of complications here in the coming months. And as I say, it's going to be really down to the lawyers to try and get this addressed once and for all.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming and spending this hour on it's a bank holiday for some of us. And hopefully we'll be able to meet in person soon. And I'll circulate the email so we can continue the discussion. Thank you very much, all.
Thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you all. Take care.